I think I have a lot of good systems in place. I mean, what I do for my job is I create standards and try to remove inefficiencies from different pieces of the operation. So like I just see things that can be optimized and try to figure out how do I automate different things? And from that, how do I help remove myself from all of the daily interactions?
Welcome to the House Hacking Success Podcast, where you'll learn the path to free rent and financial freedom through real estate. Featuring your hosts, Brad Labrie and Drew Klingler.
Hey everyone, real quick before we start the show, Brad wrote an amazing ebook that will teach you everything you need to know about house hacking and living rent-free. To get a free copy, text HouseHack, all one word, to 22828. That's HouseHack, all one word, to 22828 to get your free copy.
Welcome to House Hacking Success. Today we have Travis here. Travis, we're thrilled you're here. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, tell us about your early years being in e-commerce and what kind of led you to the idea of house hacking.
Yeah, it was kind of actually interesting how I stumbled upon it. So one of the guys that I actually worked with at a facility when I started up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, he reached out to me and said, hey, man, you really need to look at this book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So it's like the common story that a lot of people get started in. Read the book and was like, man, I'm wasting so much money on rent and doing all these things that like I'm just never going to see that money again. So read the book. After reading the book, then I started looking and Google searching like, hey, how do I find out more about like what's going on and what's out there, information that I don't know. And that's when I stumbled upon BiggerPockets, as many people do when they start doing some research on real estate. And then once I did that, I actually had to move, got a promotion in my job where I was able to move down to Orlando and start up a new building. And at that point, I knew that I was no longer going to rent. I didn't want to waste money and make somebody else rich, more or less. So decided to move down to Orlando, buy a house. The house process was super strange because I'd never experienced anything or actually bought a house and didn't know what I was looking for and really what to look for and how much I could afford. Didn't have a great real estate agent, so they didn't really help me with negotiation or really understanding what I could afford. So probably bought a house that was a little bit more expensive than what I should have bought. Just thinking that like, hey, well, I'm going to be building up equity and I'm paying down the principal. So I bought the house, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2,100 square feet, with no intention of renting out any rooms originally. And then it was kind of funny how house hacking kind of stumbled upon it. So I was listening to the BiggerPockets podcast, but hadn't heard or seen anything that they started talking about house hacking yet. I was still starting from episode 1 and just continuing on through all the episodes that they had. And I actually had a buddy reach out to me from New York, and he was like, hey, man, I'm going to come down to Orlando and I'm going to play some pro tournaments down in Orlando, and I need to stay there for the summer. There's like a pro tour, a mini tour that they have in Orlando. And he's like, I want to come down and do you mind if I crash at your place? And I was like, I mean, I got 2 extra bedrooms. I'm not using them right now. I might as well, like, whatever. He's like, hey, what do you think is a reasonable price? I'm like, honestly, man, I don't know. Like, tell me whatever you want to pay and like, we'll make it work. So we ended up agreeing that like $500 was a reasonable amount. And so he moved down, started paying $500 a month. And I was like, holy crap, like I'm making $500 a month. And I literally like out of nowhere. And the crazy thing was too, so 2 weeks into him staying, he met this other guy that was on the mini pro tour. And he's like, hey man, this guy's in the same situation I am. He wants to do this tour for a little bit longer. Do you mind if he stays in the other room? And I'm like, well, shit, like, I guess like $500 more. And so at that point, I just told them both $500, like whatever. I had no idea how much I could actually get for the rooms. I was just super excited. Like, hey, that's $1,000 off my mortgage. That is completely gone. Now I'm living for less than I was when I was paying $1,200 a month in rent up in Pennsylvania when I was living there. So at that point, they had stayed for a little bit. I think they stayed for like 5 or 6 months. And during the course of their stay, I started looking at like how much could I actually rent these rooms out for? Because I had no idea. Like the house was completely furnished with all my stuff. I provided all the furniture in the bedrooms and everything. So I started looking. I was like, man, I can get $800-900 a month for these rooms. Like I was renting them out to them for super super cheap. But I was starting to learn the process of like what was going on and everything. And that's when like once my friend moved out, the other guy ended up staying. I kept his rent at $500 a month, but then I started looking at, okay, like what other things can I do? And that's when I actually started Airbnb-ing out the other room instead of doing long-term. So I had like a unique strategy in the sense that I started with the short, long-term rental for each individual bedroom, and then I transitioned to Airbnb. And then I actually had some of the Airbnb guests end up staying long-term. So a lot of people were coming down to Orlando to look for a place. And then they liked my house so much that they're like, hey, do you mind if I stay here for a little bit longer? And was able to get those rents from between $900 and $1,100 a month, depending on who was coming down and like what time of the year it was. So kind of crazy how it all just stumbled into place. But yeah.
Awesome, man. So we actually kind of hear that often, where people kind of stumble into it, because it's sort of that it's very entrepreneurial, and it's not very widely known. But once you sort of, get that sense of like, man, like I just got, like you said, like, man, I got $500 off my mortgage. And then like, man, I got $1,000. It's kind of addicting. And it's kind of that entrepreneurial bug that leads people down that path. Now, to back up just a little bit on that first house hack, like, how did you find it? And then also, how did you finance it? Like, was it, FHA, or like, how did you go about finding it and funding that? I know you had an agent and everything.
Yeah. So with the move package, how my company works. So if you get a promotion and you move over a certain distance, they give you like real estate agent and help you move all your stuff. So I got that real estate agent, and that's the one that I was working with to find the deal. Honestly, I was just driving around and looking in the market in Orlando to try to find a place that was close to work, but also find a place that I knew I was going to be buying a home that I wasn't going to end up in Orlando and stay in Orlando. So I knew I had to be mobile for my job. So I wanted to buy a home in a nice area with good school districts. So that's the main area that I looked for, because I knew that after moving out of the home, I would want to rent it long term to a family, more or less. So started looking in areas that were safe, and there was a bunch of new construction going on, and I was definitely open to the idea of buying a new house versus buying something that was old and probably would require more maintenance. So really just drove around the area, found some nice new homes in the area, and then ended up financing the deal through 3.5% down. I actually did a 3.5% down conventional loan. I thought I was doing an FHA loan, but again, going back to like how like my real estate agent didn't really keep me in the loop. I didn't know anything at the time when I was buying the house. I just knew I wanted to buy versus rent. So yeah, did 3.5% down, and then yeah, just recently was able to, with how good the market's been doing and everything, was able to get rid of the PMI that I was paying every single month as well.
Awesome. So we'll touch back with that PMI a little bit later, but
cool. So what was the system like using Airbnb versus long-term rentals?
Yeah, so Airbnb, it was interesting because when I was originally, a lot of people think Airbnb, like you have to be like physically there all the time to be able to manage the property, and that's true to an extent, but long term is definitely easier in the sense that like you get somebody to sign a contract, they're going to stay there. You don't really have to worry about anything. Maybe they text you of like if they have an inconvenience or something, or the AC's out, and when you come home you fix it. But Airbnb is definitely it takes a lot more time, but if you set up the right systems in place, it really isn't that bad. So I have with like the long-term rental or the Airbnb full-time rental, I set some systems in place so that a lot of the messaging is handled automatically. At least when like guests first inquire and things like that, and being able to actually just got a message from my guest who's checking in today. So like Airbnb, you can set up systems to help with the messaging and some of the management, but you can also help yourself by setting up the house in certain ways. One of the big things that I found was super important early on when I was doing Airbnb. I I actually like would put a key under the mat for them to get in, because I didn't know like what else could I do. But then I started to figure out, hey, there's these smart locks where you can literally buy a smart lock. So I bought like a Schlage, one of the keypads, smart keypads, and then I can start just giving them an access code. So now I don't have to be home when they get in to be able to get them into the house. So there's like unique things and unique ways that you can make your life easier to manage the overall property for short term. That makes it more or less the same amount of work as long term, but also is more profitable in many areas. So
creating systems is so key. So we appreciate those tips. And you being in LA right now, like you said, you just got a message for somebody moving in there. So obviously it's a testament to the systems you have in place and your ability to now not need to physically be there to transact the deal. And so that's awesome. So going to your second deal, which you bought in Orlando for strictly Airbnb, from what I understand, like tell us about, a lot of times there's a barrier to entry to get into a second deal, right? It's sort of, banks need more requirements. Like, how did you find it? But then also, how did you finance that one on your second deal?
Yeah, so that one was a super interesting one. So for my job, I hadn't taken any time off, and I knew I wanted to make my next move for real estate, and I knew that I wanted to get at least one more deal for the end of this year. So I ended up taking the full week off around my birthday, and I was like, I don't care what I do. Like, I am going to wake up at 3 a.m. every single morning and just look for homes and try to figure out like what area of the market that I want to be in, knowing that I was going to do a Airbnb for the rental. So I took a week off of work, and like all day, every day for a week, I was just searching homes, areas, like cost per night, vacancy rates, just overall utilities costs, HOAs, all those things, until I found 10 different properties that I was super interested in. I found a real estate agent, and then from there just started putting contracts out on homes. Of the 10 different homes that I put out and made an official offer on, 3 came back, and then started the negotiation process from there. And actually ended up closing the deal on the one that I got when I was at a wedding in Dallas, getting the text back from my real estate agent, going back and forth like, oh, they're coming back and saying this, and it was super interesting to like 7 days from the start of the week to the end of the week, I had the deal closed, or on paper closed. There was a lot more that actually ended up going into it, but it was super exciting to get that from a financing standpoint. Did 20% down, conventional. It was interesting though. I learned a lot of things through the process of the second one, as buying a home for an investment property versus having the home for house hacking. One of the big things that I didn't realize in the first house is interest rates, and how interest rates are never locked and they're always changing, and also how I found somebody to finance, and I originally found somebody at 5.75%, 30-year conventional. And I was like, okay, well, I've already talked to them, so I must be locked in, because they gave me the rate and everything. And I started talking to somebody on it. It was funny. I started talking to somebody on Instagram that does a lot of investing and whatnot. And he's like, dude, you're not locked in yet. Like, you can get so much better than that. He's like, go on and start looking for, and like literally just shop around. And what was crazy to find was like the lenders that were never locked in. The second you told them, hey, I got a better rate somewhere else, they immediately dropped their rate. Like, it was like literally just like immediately dropped their rate. And a lot of people don't understand that like rates are never locked in. Like lenders will tell you that they're locked in, but like the reality is they have so much more room to really, really play with. And like for them, I'm the dream person to lend to, because I don't have any bad debt from credit cards, student loans, car loans, anything like that. And I'm bringing in income on my house hack to where I don't have any living expenses. And I also I try to like hack a bunch of different parts of my life, but I also travel for work. So another big piece of my overall living expenses being food don't really exist, because Monday to Friday I'm typically traveling, so I don't have to worry about food or anything like that. So From overall expenses, my debt to income ratio looks really, really good for what lenders look for. So it was super easy to take and leverage different offers from lenders to negotiate that interest rate down.
So that was a conventional, the second one?
Yep. Yeah. 20% down, conventional one.
Okay. So back it up just real quick. I've never heard anyone talk about this, which is kind of intriguing. Vacancy rates with Airbnb, they can be very challenging to, sort of get your pulse on it, right? Where vacancy rates maybe in the long-term game on multifamilies can be a little bit easier to pinpoint. How did you come up with that rate? Did you just ask people? Is there a site? How did you come up with a vacancy rate for Airbnb?
Yeah, so there's a couple different sites. The one that I specifically use to help, now I would say like these sites are fairly accurate, but you still have to go and dig and do more research on your own. But the site that I use is called Mashvisor. So Mashvisor is essentially at Mashvisor and AirDNA. Those are the two that are most commonly used for Airbnb. They also have Mashvisor also has it also looks at long-term vacancy rates too in different areas. But you can essentially take you can take Orlando and you can plug in Orlando and then it'll show you a map and then you can toggle between cash on cash return for long-term investing, long-term rentals, cash on cash return for Airbnbs. So you can do all these different toggles and it'll essentially take the map and it'll green, yellow, red, like the good and bad areas. So it'll literally the entire map and you can zoom in, zoom out to different areas, but you can start to really toggle between cash on cash return, vacancy rate, rental income, and you can just take a big snapshot, look at where all the green, yellow, red is, and then where you see the most green when you toggle, you can start zooming into those areas and really start to pinpoint areas that make the most sense. And so I did that for vacancy rate, rental income, and cash on cash return for Airbnb. Found two different areas within Orlando that I really, really liked. And then from there, essentially took the information of their vacancy rates and then went to Airbnb and started searching people's in that area. And what I would do is I'd click into listings and I would look at their calendar. So I wouldn't when I go into a listing, I'm not like clicking specific dates. I want to see every single date on their calendar that's open so that I can see okay, in the month of November, we're 3 months out and they have 10 days still unbooked, or in December, we're 4 months out and they have 15 days unbooked. I can see all that information and then leverage that information to start understanding what vacancy rates are at different price points, because vacancy rates are going to differ based off different price points and what your property is. So if you're a higher end property, there's a chance that you're going to have a higher vacancy rate unless you bring the price a little bit down. And if you bring the price down, you'll start to see your vacancy rate go up. So there's a pretty direct correlation between your vacancy rates and what your price point that you're trying to get people to come in at.
Awesome. Cool. So you just removed PMI from your property,
Yep.
which is pretty easy process, but a lot of people don't know about it. Talk about how you were able to do that.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting one. At first, I actually forgot.
And also, real quick, before we get too far into it, a lot of people might not even know what PMI is. So talk a little bit to that and then how you removed it.
Yeah, so PMI is a mortgage insurance that you pay on anything that you put less than 20% down on a down payment for a house. So essentially, I actually forgot I was paying PMI in my payment. So they do a good job. Your lenders do a really good job of kind of not even letting you know that that's part of the payment if you're paying it. Because if you look at your balance sheet, it's not on there. But essentially, I somehow remembered that I was paying PMI, and I called my lender and I said, "Hey, I'm wasting $97 a month. That's just gone. How do I get rid of this?" And these places have a PMI department. So they transfer you to the PMI department. And I started talking to the PMI people and they're like, okay, let's look at let's bring your balance up and see. So I had $260,000 still left on principal on my house and I bought it for $292,000. So they were like, there's one of two things that you can do to get rid of PMI. the first thing that you can do is you have to have a 20% loan to, like you have to own 20% of your house. So at 300,000, if it was a $300,000 house, you would have to own 60, or your principal payment left would have to be at 240,000. So like that would mean that you own 20% of the house. And then at that point, they would automatically, by law, they're supposed to automatically take it off. Like if they don't, you should call them and they need to take it off. The other way that you can get rid of PMI is by a loan to value of 78%. So essentially what that means is that if let's just say a $100,000 house, like I would have to own my principal payment would have to be 78,000 in order for me to get rid of PMI. So in my situation, because I put 3.5% down, I wasn't gonna. I would have to come to the table with a lot of cash to be able to get to the 20% that I would need for them to automatically remove. So the next best thing was to say, okay, let's have somebody come out and appraise the home. So if I were to go on the second approach for the loan to value of 78%, somebody would need to come appraise the home, and my house would need to be appraised at $345,000 based off the principal that I had left in order to have the 78% loan to value. So somebody came to the house. I actually made some upgrades in the house as well. It was 2,100 square feet. I added an additional bedroom by like getting a GC to come out and putting up just framing a door and putting a new room in there. So I added another bedroom. I fenced in the backyard. The home values were going up across all of Orlando. So it was able to appraise for over that $345,000. And then at that point, they automatically removed the PMI. So now that $97 a month that I was essentially wasting is now gone.
Yeah, that's super cool. And not a whole lot of people realize that there are two ways. You know, either you can pay down, which takes a lot of cash, but if you force appreciate, you know, you add some value, or maybe the property values like yours were skyrocketing so much, all you need it to go up is 22%, right? So it's either pay down, or if the property appreciates, you just have to get to 78% LTV, like you said, which you have 22% equity. And a lot of times you could just talk to your agent and say, hey, can you give me some comps? They'll give you some local comps again of prices that sold. Maybe you can keep an eye out as well. And you can get a pretty good idea of where that is. And another thing that people don't realize is you can challenge the appraisal, right? Yes. This happens all the time with clients. I'm an agent. So I help this out with clients a lot, is like when we're buying, you know, appraisers are very, very, they're just really lazy. And so really like if you give them a purchase price, they're going to essentially go like $5,000 or $6,000 over the purchase price and get you through with the loan, right? That's just kind of like par for the course. Well, me as an agent, you know, running comps, I'm like, there's no way. Like, this is why, this is it. Like, that square footage is, you know, that price of square foot is way off. So anyways, you can challenge them and actually get them to increase it, long story short, to get you that PMI off, which a lot of people don't realize.
Absolutely. It's interesting, the challenge of appraisal. So my uncle's a real estate agent in Phoenix, and the challenge of appraisal is actually a way that I got $5,000 off my second property. So part of the negotiation, the appraisal came in super low compared to like the home's value was around 220, but the appraisal came in at 196. But so I called my uncle and figured out like what was going on and like what I could do. But I ended up not challenging the appraisal on purpose because I wanted to go to the seller and say, hey, here's what the appraisal came in at. I want you to lower the price. And they actually lowered the price $5,000 just from the appraisal, when I knew the appraisal was ridiculous, like based off of all the comps in the area. And like you were saying, the appraisers nowadays are just lazy, and they're just gonna look at like base comps and not really like actually understand different features of the home. So I actually purposefully didn't challenge an appraisal so that on the second property, so that I can get the seller to drop the price even more. Now I had to come to the table with more cash because of the appraisal amount, because I didn't challenge it. But it ended up working in the end.
Yeah. And then when you go back, now that you own the property, now you can go back, get you and your agent or whatever, come together with a definitive CMA, present it to an appraiser, say, listen, like it's not 196, it's this, and you challenge that. If they don't go, you can actually go through the procedure of getting it reversed outside of that particular appraisal. They'll bring in the second party. You know, there's a whole bullet point. But yeah, you can absolutely change it. And that's a great way. Like your point is you didn't want to challenge it when you're buying, but now that you own it, you know that you can get that appraisal up.
Yep.
Good point.
Absolutely.
Good point.
Cool. So you went to 200,000 in net worth in about 400 days. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how you developed 7 income streams?
Yeah. So that really started happening once I found the whole FI community and Bigger Pockets. And I started like heavily listening to all the Bigger Pockets podcasts, and they start to bring on all these different people outside of the technical real estate realm. So I started to find like Choose FI, Mad Fientist, Mr. Money Mustache, like all the really big names within the FI community. And I realized that like I had all this money like sitting in my bank account, like literally doing nothing, earning 0.01%. Bank of America was like just screwing me over. And like I realized that like, hey, I need this money invested. Like this money is literally sitting in a bank account doing absolutely nothing. Like I need to start investing this money. So on top of transitioning all of my money into index funds and a few other income streams, I also really started to take a look at the income that I was creating from my W-2 and saying, okay, well now I'm house hacking, which is saving all my expenses, my living expenses. So I don't have a rent or anything. Everything was being dumped into investments every single month. And also over the course of 3 or 4 years, I was able to 5X my W-2. So that in combination with like, hey, I'm very much a minimalist. I'm not going to spend on, I don't drive a nice car. I house hack. So I could live on my own, and then I also travel for work. So all of my living expenses during the week and food and everything is all taken care of. So all of those things compounded on top of each other really helped me to like aggressively save and invest almost everything. So now I try to keep my bank account extremely low to where I'm like I'm living paycheck to paycheck, even though I'm not living paycheck. Like I could easily like keep more money in there, but I want to feel like I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Because it really helps me to invest aggressively and invest all that excess income that I have coming in.
And that's a great way to think about it, because, that forces yourself, right? It puts pressure on yourself because, the next thing we're going to talk about is how you have a ridiculous 80% savings rate. No one has 80% savings rate, but Drew and I have similar, right? And it's like you talked about, things that most people don't talk about, which is, driving cash cars or, where you don't have a car payment, because that takes up so much of the income. Basically, the average U.S. American is over 50% between housing expense and auto loans, yep. auto financing. That's 50% right there. So if you eliminate, like you did, those two things, you're already at 50% savings rate. Then if you just do the normal 20%, 15 or 20%, which most people, like Dave Ramsey and stuff would suggest to invest, there's 65, 70%, right? So like just doing those two things, which for, Scott Trench's book, Set for Life, is one of my favorites. And that was the paradigm shift for me between like variable expenses, which is, Tim Hortons and Starbucks, right? Like coffee, versus, which is just a few $100s a year versus the 50%, of your fixed incomes, or fixed expenses like car and house, right? It was a huge paradigm. So talk a little bit about that 80%. Like no one our age has 80% savings rate. Like how did you get there? Like we talked a little bit already, but talk to that.
Yeah, it's funny you say Set for Life, because that's a big book that I read too from Scott Trench that really helped understand like what are the big expenses, because the reality is like, and I don't know how much you guys know about like the 80-20 rule, but like the Pareto's 80-20 rule says that like typically 20% of your expenses are going to account for 80% of the total amount of your expenses. So like the top 3 expenses being housing, transportation, and food, typically, or food, entertainment combined, however you want to separate those out. Like if you can figure out ways to hack those, then everything else becomes so much easier. So house hacking, eliminating the house expense, making money from the house, like making a couple $100 a month is a significant help. Increasing the W-2 income also definitely helps. And then going through and having the job that I have where I travel pretty much all the time, Monday to Friday. So like my company is paying for my food during the week. it is super easy though when you have a job where you travel a lot to spend a lot of money of your money while you're traveling, because it's super easy to like, hey, I want to grab a beer every single night, or I want a glass of wine or whatever, where like my company is not paying for alcohol. So like it's super easy where that stuff will start to add up if like you like to do that. But because like when I go out, like I'm just going to grab something and drink water or soda or whatever. Like all those small things will add up. But if you eliminate a lot of the stuff that you just don't care about, and like just don't bring you any happiness, then you can really start to aggressively invest that money. And that's really what's helped me to get to that 80% savings rate. There's some months that the one caveat I'll say on that I think people need to be careful about with savings rate is you can overdo it. So like some people will overdo it where all of a sudden they just won't have any happiness in life. Like they're so stuck on like hitting a number that like they eliminate things that actually bring them happiness. Like for me, two of the things that like I enjoy are like I love golfing, and I like the morning Starbucks coffee. Like those are the two things that I enjoy. Like those aren't things that I'm going to eliminate out of my life. But like don't try to overdo your savings rate just to hit a number. And eliminate some of the things that make you happy in life, because like you got to find the right balance of both. And I will say like there was months where I would overdo it, where I was like I didn't go out and then do the things that I enjoy. And I've really started to the last 4 or 5 months, I've really started to reel that in and make sure that like, hey, if I don't hit 80%, it's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. Like it's still like I'm saving a lot of money and I'm investing it. But like, don't get overly caught up in trying to hit a specific number.
And that's why, for me personally, that book, Set for Life, was like a saving grace for me. Because, you know, I grew up on sort of from a family that, you know, I grew up on a farm. So we were very conservative when it came to money. And, you know, like you save money. You know, my parents taught me the value of a dollar, you know, and so it was very difficult for me to go get coffee. You know, I beat myself up a little bit. And so just that book, the paradigm shift of realizing that it's only a couple $100, and not that you shouldn't be conscious of it, but the fact that, you know, vehicle and housing expense exponentially, you know, reduces increases your savings rate versus coffee. Now, you know, I can enjoy a coffee and, you know, but I counteract that with my housing and my car expense. So you're absolutely right, because you can overdo it.
Absolutely.
Cool. So you became a prominent member of the FIRE community. Could you tell us why you don't necessarily agree with some of the stuff?
Yeah, I think the FIRE movement is super important to that it's somewhat caught mainstream. It's starting to get more and more traction. It seems like every single month as more people are writing about it and talking about it. And there's more people in the news that are being interviewed on Good Morning America and things like that. I think FIRE is, and for people that don't know, FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. So I think it's a good goal to get to being financially independent. But I would say like my overarching goal is to never retire. Like even though the movement is guiding people in the right direction, I think the end goal shouldn't be retirement. Because at the end of the day, like you can only sit on the beach and drink pina coladas for so long. Like that gets old after a while. Like traveling, yeah, it's fun. Like it would be fun a couple months a year and like go see all these cool places. But it can only last for so long and do it for a couple of years. So I think that like being financially independent is super important. I think that it's the least talked about thing, and most people are just stuck in that like, hey, I'm going to work 9 to 5. I'm going to retire when I'm 65. I'm going to have like money in my 401k. Hopefully, like it's important to like take control of your financial independence at a young age, because if you do it at a young age, I mean, everybody understands exponential growth. Like if you look at charts, if you start it young, like you're going to be exponentially further, even when you're 30, 35, 40 years old, than all your friends that like, oh, I'll wait to invest in my 401k, or I'll wait to invest in the stock market or real estate or whatever you're doing. So I think it's super, super important to start early. But I just think the end goal shouldn't be retirement, the end goal should be like, you still need to have your passions that you do. You don't necessarily have to work for money. Like, you can work for free once you're financially independent and all of your income streams are paying for your life. At that point, you can really start to do some of the passions that you really enjoy for not thinking about money at all, because at that point you're set.
That's great advice. I mean, you don't necessarily have to retire early, but if you are financially independent, you could leave a job that you don't like and pursue more meaningful work.
Exactly.
And I like the way that Chad Carson from Bigger Pocket puts this the best, is that the fact that, like, we should redefine retirement, A, but then B, like you said, it's about doing what matters most. Like, that's his motto, is do what matters most when you get to that point. And, he talks a lot to the fact that he works more now than he ever did when he, quote unquote, like, worked in the business. And it's more on things that he's super passionate about, right? Like right now, in Clemson, South Carolina, where he lives, he's fighting for a bike path to better the community. And he spends a lot of time, he talks a lot about spending a lot of time doing that. And there are a lot of people in the fire community that speak to that. And so I absolutely agree with you that, retirement, like in its traditional form, is not really something that appeals to me. I don't really like sitting on my hands very often, but redefining it and turning into doing what matters most to you, I think, that's what the true end goal should be for the fire movement. I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, what are your long-term goals in fire and then also in real estate as well?
Yeah. So I have pretty lofty goals. So I want to get to it between real estate and other investment vehicles. I want to get to generating $40,000 a month in income. So like that's my stretch goal. So pretty lofty, but if you don't go big, then there's no point in having a goal. So like I have a goal of trying to add 3 or 4 more properties next year. I would love to do one more house hack, another house hack next year as well, and then maybe 2 or 3 additional Airbnb properties. I also want to try to expand and grow like as a host. So I would love to start hosting for others on Airbnb, because I have a lot of really good systems in place, and I really enjoy being able to create the experience for the guests. I think it's super, super important that when I'm hosting for my guests in Orlando, like I know that those families are coming for Disney World. Most of the families that are coming in town are coming for Disney World. And I know that like I shape a big part of their experience coming to Orlando. Part of it's the parks, but another big part of it is shaping that experience on where they're staying at, providing a great guest experience. So I really, really enjoy and take pride in a lot of that. So I'd love to continue to expand the amount of properties that I have in the area, as well as looking at co-hosting for others and taking over that management piece. Because I think I have a lot of good systems in place. I mean, what I do for my job is I create standards and try to remove inefficiencies from different pieces of the operation. So like I just see things that can be optimized and try to figure out how do I automate different things. And from that, how do I help remove myself from all of the daily interactions so I can set up systems where a lot of things are automatically taken care of, and I only need to step in when something happens or something goes wrong. So I'd love to continue to expand my real estate portfolio, one more house hack next year, and then look to start co-hosting for others.
And people don't really talk to that. We talk about property management companies, right? Which is kind of more of the traditional sense of, maybe large multifamilies or just, even single families, right? There are people that have property management with it. But there's also sort of a property management segment in Airbnb, right? And it's something that maybe is underutilized because there are a lot of opportunities within that industry, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So super cool.
Awesome. So we like to read a lot. We always ask our guests what their favorite books are. What is your favorite mindset or business book?
Yeah, so I have a lot. I actually hated reading coming out of school, but once I read Rich Dad Poor Dad and realized all the different knowledge that's out there, I started to read a ton. A couple of the big books that I've been reading and continue to go back and read. I don't know if you guys have heard of Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. Super interesting book. it's Napoleon Hill was alive in like early 1900s, and this book wasn't like this manuscript or whatever wasn't found until I think it's the last 10 or 20 years. But essentially it's Napoleon Hill having a conversation, like literally it's like a ask question with the devil, and he's like trying to like understand like his thought process. And it talks a lot about like the devil talks a lot about drifting and how he tries to get people to drift, where if you look at like the day and age that we live in and like how prominent technology is, and like everybody's always on their phone, and everybody's always like they come home and like they go watch Netflix, or they turn on the TV immediately when they sit down. Like people are more or less in this constant cycle of like they don't go out and do things. Like they're not trying to like learn, create, invest, create different income streams, doing these different things. It's so much easier to come home from your 9 to 5, sit on the couch and turn on the TV and just kind of drift, like what they reference as drifting. So I think that's a really, really interesting book. If you haven't heard of it or read it, definitely recommend. Another one, I don't know if you guys have heard of Ryan Holiday, but he just came out with a new book called Stillness is Key. It's a super interesting book, and it also talks about just how people really struggle nowadays just being silent and like removing all technology and just like being with themselves and like understanding what they're thinking, well, like what goes on through their mind. I've been getting into like doing some meditation and like journaling and that kind of stuff. And he talks about how important doing those different things are to really understand and be introspective to yourself and try to understand how you're thinking, why you're thinking that, and how that's impacting the different things of your life. So that's also a really, really good book, part of like the Stoic philosophy and those things. But that a couple other ones, Miracle Morning. I don't know if you guys have heard of Hal Elrod. Love that book.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest shift for me 3 years ago when I found Hal. I've actually posted a couple things about Hal, and he's actually liked them on Instagram, which was awesome. I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's another good one. And then Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. I don't know if you guys have heard of David Goggins, but that guy's like a complete animal, and his mindset is like the craziest mindset that I've ever seen. I think he's a little extreme, people would say, but that's also a really, really interesting book.
And he kind of makes you feel smaller every time you either hear him or listen to him, right? I mean, that dude. That dude's a tank.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of that, like, what are your favorite real estate specific books? Maybe books on either Airbnb or just real estate in general.
Yeah, so the two of the big books that I read starting out early on after reading Rich Dad Poor Dad were the ABCs of Real Estate Investing. Really enjoyed that one from like understanding the basics, and then the Millionaire Real Estate Investor. Those are two of the big real estate books early on that I've read, and really started to get a good base knowledge and understanding of the real estate world. I will say, like, I've listened to all the Bigger Pockets podcasts. Like that's. I went from reading the introduction real estate books to listening to most of the Bigger Pockets podcasts to really start to develop my knowledge and further understanding of what's going on out there.
Absolutely. That's awesome.
Cool. So what's the one thing that would separate potential house hackers from people that are actually doing it?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing to me is action. I mean, a lot of people talk and have the analysis paralysis, but like a lot of people are afraid to take action. Like if you run the numbers, if it makes sense, if you like the area, like you got to take action. And that's one of the biggest things that people get nervous. Like I'll admit, like that week when I was looking for that second property, like I was super nervous that like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. Take action, run the numbers, spend the time, but like actually go do it. Like stop like sitting. I'm a spreadsheet guy and like run the numbers. Like, does it make sense? Like, what if it doesn't work out? Like at some point you got to take action and you got to take calculated risk. And if you do that enough, you'll start to learn and you'll start to evolve and figure out, okay, this is what I did well. These are the mistakes that I made. So the next time you do it, now you have that additional knowledge gap that you had on the previous deal or whatever, that now you're not going to make those mistakes again. So if you continue to do that, the only way you're going to learn is by taking action. So I think that's the biggest thing that is the gap between people that are doing it and people that are just kind of thinking about doing it.
Absolutely. And we talked to Craig Kurlop, who wrote the house hacking strategy for Bigger Pockets. So we talked about Bigger Pockets a little bit. And like the biggest thing that a lot of house hackers don't really understand, I feel like, is the fact that the big ROI of being a house hacker is the 30% you remove from the standard American budget, which is rent or mortgage, right? Like that's the big ROI, which is the difference where if you're an investor, like your second property, it's strictly investment, like you're expecting an immediate ROI, return on investment by cash flow and in other ways, right? Maybe appreciation or whatever your market demands. But as a house hacker, like you can take a lot of things can go wrong, right? You can have things go wrong with the property. Maybe you have a month where you don't have a tenant in there, but those are really small, minor details compared to how much you save over the course of a year from a mortgage and rent, right? From a traditional American budget. And so like the big ROI is that savings rate, the 30%. And then, from there, if you can actually cash flow on top of that, I mean, that's just gravy, right? You don't need that ROI like most investors do. And most people don't really realize that. And that's how, just to further your point of action, like that's the big action point. The numbers do have to make sense and there's a time for that. But really, I mean, as long as you can break even, and where you're living for free or you can come close like you did, you were like $200 or $300, I think, on your first property when you had $1,000 in rent, right? Like, I mean, that's a huge win, right? Yeah. And people just need to understand that, I feel like.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Cool. So you're real big on the online space. I mean, you have a lot of great content. Where can people reach out and learn more about your journey and maybe just contact you and start to learn more about what you're doing and trying to increase their savings rate as well?
Yeah, the best way to contact me right now is on Instagram. So Instagram handle is TheYoungRetireeBy33. So if you reach me out there, that's definitely the best spot to reach out. And anybody that reaches out, I try to respond to within a couple hours if I'm awake. So love interacting and meeting new people that are either asking questions or like crushing the game. And I love learning from all the different members of the community that are out there. So that's the best spot to reach me at. I also have a blog, TheYoungRetireeBy33.com. So that's where I'm posting a lot of content. Haven't put a lot out there this month just because it's crazy this time of the year for work. I've been super busy, but we'll start putting a lot more content coming up here in the next couple weeks.
Awesome, Travis. Well, we really appreciate you coming on. We learned a lot. Your story is awesome, and you're doing it in a unique market, which is Orlando. Which is a very tourist town, and so your story is super cool. And we look forward to growing with you and having you back on at some point.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate you having me on.